My name is Emily. I'm 17, and I've spent most of my life feeling like a forgotten child. I've always been the good girl, quiet, responsible, doing what's expected, but never getting much attention. My older sister, Olivia, 25, was the one who shone in our family. She was the center of everyone's world. Her successes were celebrated, her mistakes were forgiven, and she had the spotlight. I wasn't jealous, but as I got older, it became clear that my role in the family was different. Olivia was always first, and I was just there. I didn't mind that much, at least not until I started thinking about my future. I had one thing that kept me going: the scholarship fund my grandparents had set aside for me. They passed away when I was younger, but they left behind $120,000 for my college education. My parents always assured me that the money was safe and that I had nothing to worry about. They promised I'd be taken care of financially for college. So, as I started preparing for college applications, I assumed everything was in order. The fund would be there for me to use as promised. That was until one night when I casually asked my mom about it during dinner. I had just spoken with a college admissions counselor, and I wanted to confirm the details about the fund. When I asked, my mom froze for a second, her fork midair. She glanced nervously at my dad before putting it down slowly. "Don't worry about it, Em," she said with a forced smile. "It's all taken care of. You'll have everything you need." Something about her tone didn't sit right. I pushed a little further. "What do you mean by taken care of? I just need to know if there's anything I need to do before applying." My dad sighed, looking irritated. After a long pause, my mom finally spoke up, though I could tell she was uncomfortable. "Actually, Emily, we used that money for Olivia. She needed it more right now." My mind went blank. "What do you mean? That money was for me, for my education." "What do you mean Olivia needed it more?" My dad shifted in his chair, arms crossed. "Olivia was in a tough spot, Em. She needed a house. We couldn't just leave her like that." The words didn't hit me right away. I asked again, unable to process. "You took the money? The money that was supposed to be for my future? For Olivia's house?" My mom's response was cold, as if it was the most logical thing in the world. "She's family, Emily." We did what we had to do. The room seemed to close in around me. My stomach dropped. The one thing I had left, my future, was gone. And they didn't even have the decency to ask me. It was like a punch in the gut. I couldn't speak for a moment. I stood up from the table, my hands trembling. I didn't say anything as I walked out of the room, but I could still hear my dad's voice trailing behind me, dismissive and cruel. "What, Emily? You think you can sue us? You can't even afford a lawyer." The words stung harder than I expected. I was in shock, disbelief swirling in my mind. How could they take something that was supposed to be mine, that was promised to me, and give it to Olivia without even telling me? I slammed my bedroom door shut and collapsed on the bed, trying to understand what had just happened. How could they do this to me? I had nothing left. My future, my chance to go to college, was ripped away. I stayed in my room, lost in thought for hours, but I couldn't make sense of any of it. They didn't even think about what this would do to me. The weight of their betrayal was suffocating. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I couldn't stay with people who would do something like this. That night, I made a decision. I was leaving. I didn't know where I would go or how I would survive, but I couldn't stay with them. Not after this. I packed a small bag, grabbed my phone, and slipped out of the house quietly. I didn't even know if they noticed I was gone, but honestly, I didn't care. I called my best friend, Lily, as soon as I was out of the house. I explained everything, and without hesitation, she told me to come over. "You're always welcome here," she said. Lily's family let me stay with them, but I knew this couldn't be a permanent solution. I needed help. I needed someone who could help me get back on my feet, and that's when I thought of Uncle Jake. He wasn't someone I was close to, but he had always come through in tough times. I called him the next morning, not sure what to expect. When I explained what happened, his response was immediate. "I'll take care of this, Emily. You don't have to go through this alone." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I hadn't been at Lily's for long when I realized that staying with her wasn't going to fix anything. It was a temporary escape, a safe place to crash, but it wasn't going to make the problem go away. I needed a solution, something permanent, and it felt like time was running out. I tried to keep myself distracted. I spent hours scrolling through college websites, looking for scholarships I might have missed, trying to figure out how to put together a future that had suddenly become uncertain. But every time I thought about what my parents had done, I felt that familiar wave of anger and betrayal rising in my chest. They'd robbed me of the one thing I was depending on, and I couldn't just sit back and let it slide. I couldn't forgive them for this. I'd known for a while that my relationship with my parents was strained, but I never imagined it would come to something like this. I thought we were a family who took care of each other, but now I realized that the only person my parents really cared about was Olivia. They'd gone so far as to sacrifice my future to help her buy a house, something that wasn't even urgent. Olivia had a good job. She wasn't in financial trouble. She didn't need my college fund, not in the way I did, but the more I thought about it, the more I knew I couldn't fight them alone. I didn't have the legal knowledge or the connections to deal with something like this. What I needed was someone who could stand up to them, someone who could help me put things right. And then it hit me, Uncle Jake. He was the only one in my family who wasn't afraid to take on my parents when they were wrong. We weren't close, but over the years, I'd always known that if things got bad, I could count on him. I hesitated for a few moments before dialing his number. I didn't know how he'd react, whether he'd think I was overreacting or if he'd even want to get involved. But when the phone rang and he picked up, his voice was calm but firm, like it always was. "Hey, Emily, what's going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Uncle Jake, it's bad, really bad. My parents—" My voice cracked and I paused, trying to find the right words. "They took the money my grandparents left for my college fund. They used it to help Olivia buy a house. And now I have nothing." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Then he said in that no-nonsense way he always had, "They did what?" "They took it, Uncle Jake. They said Olivia needed it more. I don't even know what to do." Another pause. Then, "I'll be there in an hour." I didn't have to explain much more. Uncle Jake had been around enough family drama to know when things had crossed a line. He also knew the importance of the money my grandparents had left behind. It wasn't just about the money itself. It was about the promise that came with it. The promise that I'd have the chance to go to college, to build a future they knew was important to me. Within an hour, Uncle Jake was at Lily's house. He was already making calls, reaching out to his lawyer friends. He was serious about this, and I could tell. He wasn't going to let this slide. The sense of relief I felt when I saw him walk in was overwhelming. He was the first person who hadn't dismissed me, who hadn't minimized what had happened. I didn't feel crazy anymore. I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way to get things back on track. "Don't worry, kid," he said, sitting down next to me. "I'm going to get that money back. You're not going through this alone." And for the first time in days, I actually believed that something could be done. Uncle Jake didn't waste any time. He immediately contacted the lawyer who handled my grandparents' will, explaining the situation. He also reached out to the executor of the estate to confirm that the terms of the will had been violated. It didn't take long for them to confirm that my parents had indeed taken the money that was meant for my education and used it for Olivia's benefit. "Your parents are in deep trouble, Em," Uncle Jake said, as he hung up the phone after one of the calls. "This isn't just a matter of family disagreement anymore. This is a legal issue. They're going to have to answer for this." It was hard to fully process what he was saying. Part of me still couldn't believe that my parents, people I'd trusted with everything, could do something so callous. But at the same time, I felt a surge of hope. It wasn't just me against them anymore. I had someone fighting in my corner, and that made all the difference. Uncle Jake assured me that he would take the lead on all legal matters. He told me to focus on school, to keep applying to colleges, and to let him handle the messy, complicated stuff. He promised me that if my parents didn't return the money, he'd take them to court. But even with Uncle Jake's promise, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. What would this do to my relationship with my parents? Would they ever forgive me for standing up to them? Would Olivia, my own sister, turn against me for causing a rift in the family? Still, I knew deep down that I couldn't just ignore what had happened. They had stolen my future, and I wasn't going to sit quietly and let them get away with it. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to back down. If I wanted to have any kind of future at all, I had to keep fighting, no matter how hard it was. The days after I left my parents' house were a blur of confusion and quiet anger. At first, staying with Lily seemed like the best option, but the uncertainty of my situation weighed heavily on me. I was 17, alone, and without the financial support I'd always expected. It felt like the ground beneath my feet had crumbled, and all I had left were my broken dreams and the deep sense of betrayal. But in the middle of all that chaos, there was one thing that became clearer with every passing hour. I wasn't going to let my parents get away with this. They had stolen my future. The scholarship fund they had promised me was gone, and in its place, Olivia's new house stood like a cold monument to their favoritism. I couldn't just sit by and let it happen. I needed to fight back, even if I had no idea how. I called Uncle Jake a few hours after I left, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. He wasn't someone I talked to much, but I knew he was the only person who could help me. When he answered, I spilled everything: the betrayal, the stolen money, my decision to leave. His response was immediate. "Emily, this is not right. I'll help you. I'm not going to let them get away with it." I couldn't believe it. Uncle Jake had always been the quiet type, not the kind of person to get involved in family drama. But at that moment, I knew he meant it. He didn't hesitate, and that was everything I needed to hear. Within hours, he contacted the attorney who had handled my grandparents' estate. I had no idea what I was doing, but Uncle Jake took control. He made sure that the will was followed and that my rights were protected. He had always been the black sheep of the family, but now I saw a side of him that I'd never known. He was a man of action, a man who wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. Meanwhile, I was living at Lily's house, trying to keep things together. I didn't want to burden her family, so I started looking for ways to earn some money, even if it was just a small amount to help with living expenses. But more than anything, I needed peace of mind. I needed to know that my grandparents' money would be returned to me, that I would get the chance to go to college, just like they had planned. As the days passed, Uncle Jake kept me updated on everything. He was working with the lawyer, digging through the details of the will, and preparing for whatever legal action would be necessary to get the money back. I was scared, to be honest. I had no idea how this would turn out, and I didn't know if I could handle the pressure of a legal battle. But every time Uncle Jake called or texted me, I felt a little more hopeful. He wasn't going to let this slide. Then came the first call from my parents. It was late at night when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew it had to be them. I hesitated before answering. I didn't want to talk to them, but a part of me was curious. What could they possibly have to say? "Emily," my mom's voice cracked through the phone. "We need to talk." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "What do you want?" "We're sorry," she said, her tone softer now. "We were wrong, but Olivia, she needed help. You have to understand." I felt a knot form in my stomach. My parents always tried to play the guilt card and always found a way to justify their actions. This time, though, it wasn't going to work. I wasn't the naive little girl they thought they could manipulate anymore. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "You don't get to take the money that was for my future and then expect me to just forgive you. You stole my scholarship fund. I won't just let it go." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. My mom didn't say anything at first, and for a moment, I thought maybe the conversation was over. But then she spoke again, her voice now tinged with frustration. "Emily, you don't understand," she said, almost pleading. "This is hard for everyone. Olivia's situation is complicated. You can't just expect us to turn our backs on her when she needs us the most." I felt a sudden wave of anger surge through me. I've always been there for Olivia. I've always supported her. But this is about my future, my education. The money wasn't yours to take. "Please, Emily," my mom tried again. "Can't we just work something out? Come home. Let's fix this. It's tearing us apart." But I wasn't going to back down. "I'm not coming home." "You can't fix this. I'm doing this with or without you." The call ended abruptly, and I knew that nothing was going to change unless I made it happen. I couldn't rely on my parents to fix this. It was up to me and Uncle Jake. The next few days were tense. Uncle Jake kept working with the lawyer, and I kept trying to hold it together. I knew that the longer this dragged on, the harder it would be to get the money back. But I was determined. I wasn't going to let my parents' selfishness destroy my future. Then came the letter. It was from my parents' lawyer, and it was a clear sign that they were starting to panic. The letter suggested a meeting, some kind of negotiation. It was obvious they wanted to avoid a lawsuit. My parents weren't stupid. They knew they'd be in deep trouble if this went to court. But Uncle Jake wasn't willing to let them off the hook that easily. He knew what my grandparents had intended, and he wasn't about to let their wishes be ignored. We were going to fight, no matter how long it took. That was when I realized something. I wasn't alone anymore. I had people on my side, people who believed in me and were willing to help me get what was rightfully mine. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a little bit of hope. I had barely begun to process the reality of what my parents had done when Uncle Jake stepped in. His voice over the phone was calm but determined, like he already knew exactly what needed to be done. "I'll take care of this, Emily," he said. "You don't have to face this on your own." Those words meant everything to me. I wasn't alone anymore. Uncle Jake wasn't just offering words of comfort. He was offering a plan, a real chance to get back what was mine. The first thing he did was contact the lawyer who had overseen my grandparents' estate. According to the will, the $120,000 my grandparents had left for me was specifically meant to cover my college education. There was no room for interpretation. The money was mine, and my parents had no right to touch it, no matter the excuse they made. When Uncle Jake called me a few days later to update me on the situation, his voice was serious. "The lawyers confirmed it. Your parents broke the terms of the will. That money is legally yours, Emily. We're going after them." I felt a weight lift off my chest. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe a little easier. I wasn't just a victim anymore. This wasn't just about a family betrayal. It was about standing up for what was mine. It wasn't about money. It was about trust, respect, and what my grandparents wanted for me. But as soon as I hung up the phone, reality set in. I had no idea how hard this was going to be. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. Uncle Jake sent a formal notice to my parents, explaining that they had violated the terms of my grandparents' will by using the scholarship fund to buy Olivia a house. He made it clear that legal action would follow if they didn't return the money. When my mom called me a few days later, it was as if she had completely forgotten how she'd treated me just a few weeks before. Her voice was trembling with guilt and desperation, almost pleading. "Emily, I know you're angry, but you don't have to do this." "We didn't mean for things to get so complicated," she said, her tone softening. "We were just trying to help Olivia. You have to understand, she was in a really bad place. We thought she needed it more than you did right now. Please, we can fix this. We can make it right. Just come home." I didn't even know how to respond. She was still trying to justify it, still trying to twist the situation in a way that made it sound like they had done me some kind of favor. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how she could possibly think I would just forget everything and go back to living under the same roof as them after what they'd done, but I stayed calm. I didn't let myself get caught up in her guilt trips or her manipulation. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I had already made up my mind. "I'm not coming back," I said firmly. "You took what was mine, and I'm not going to pretend it's okay. I don't care how hard it is for Olivia. You don't get to take my future away from me." My mom didn't respond immediately. She must have been trying to find the right words, but I wasn't going to give her the chance to manipulate me again. Uncle Jake had already warned me about this kind of thing. "They're going to guilt trip you, Emily," he said. "They'll try to make you feel like the bad guy. Don't listen to it. This isn't your fault. You're standing up for yourself, and that's what matters." And that's exactly what I did. I didn't let them twist the narrative. I didn't let their guilt weigh me down. They had taken something from me that I was never supposed to lose, and I wasn't going to back down just because it made them uncomfortable. The legal process wasn't quick. My parents tried to fight it at first, claiming they hadn't fully understood the terms of the will, that they had acted in good faith, and that Olivia really did need the help. But the evidence was clear. The money had been specifically earmarked for my education, not for Olivia's home. The lawyer Uncle Jake had contacted was thorough, and he made sure everything was airtight. Even then, my parents didn't stop trying to convince me to let it go. They sent me multiple messages, each one more desperate than the last. My dad sent me one that read, "You know how much this is hurting Olivia. Can't you just let it slide and move on? Please, Emily. We never meant for any of this to happen." And then there was Olivia. She called me late one night, her voice quiet, almost defeated. "Emily, I get it. I know you're angry, but this isn't just about money, right? It's about the family. You're tearing us apart." I almost hung up. I wanted to, but I didn't. Because despite everything, I knew Olivia wasn't really the problem. It was my parents. They were the ones who had made the choices. Olivia had been caught in the middle, and I understood that. But I wasn't going to sacrifice my future because they had messed up. Olivia, this is not my fault, I said, my voice steady. I didn't ask for this. You didn't ask for this. But you can't just act like nothing happened. I need what's mine back, and I'm not going to back down. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, more resigned. I understand. I don't like it, but I understand. At least that was something. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In the end, the legal action moved forward, and my parents had no choice but to comply. After a few tense weeks, Uncle Jake called me to let me know the money had been wired back into my account. It wasn't a victory that felt celebratory. It wasn't about winning for me. It was about principle. It was about standing up for what was right, for protecting the trust my grandparents had placed in me. I'd gotten the money back. But more importantly, I had gotten something I'd almost lost forever. My sense of control, my confidence, and the understanding that I wasn't as powerless as I had once thought. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and messages I couldn't bring myself to respond to. Uncle Jake was relentless, his calls to my parents' lawyer becoming more frequent, his demands more firm. He didn't give them a chance to back down or make excuses. He knew what needed to be done, and I started to believe him when he said everything would work out. But even so, the emotional weight of it all was beginning to wear me down. During one particularly tense week, Uncle Jake scheduled a virtual mediation session. It was the next step in trying to resolve things without having to go to court. I knew my parents were dreading this. They had no intention of giving up the money willingly, but Uncle Jake assured me that their legal standing was weak, that they had no right to spend the money the way they did. I tried to focus on that, but as the mediation approached, I found myself filled with a knot of dread. The mediation was set for a Friday afternoon. I was sitting in a small room at Lily's house when the Zoom link came through. Uncle Jake appeared on screen first, then my parents, who looked as if they had just woken up from a nap, disheveled and defensive. They refused to make eye contact with me at first, but the second the mediator called the meeting to order, they straightened up, putting on their best "we're sorry" faces. The mediator, a professional I'd never met, started by reviewing the facts of the case. It was clear from the beginning that my parents were struggling to justify their actions. My dad kept stumbling over his words, trying to spin the situation into something that sounded reasonable. How Olivia needed help right now, how the house was a good investment, how family always looks out for each other. It was all so hollow. I let them talk. I let them twist and turn their excuses, because I knew it didn't matter. Uncle Jake had already done his homework. We weren't here to listen to their justifications. We were here to make them give me back what was rightfully mine. The mediator turned to me, asking if I had anything to say. I could feel the weight of my parents' eyes on me, but I refused to shrink under it. I took a deep breath and said what I had been thinking for weeks. I don't care about your excuses. You took my money that my grandparents gave me for college, money I worked my whole life for. I don't want to hear about how Olivia needed it. That money was for my future and you stole it. Now you have to give it back. I don't think they expected me to be so blunt, but I didn't care. This wasn't a time for sugarcoating things or pretending we were a normal family with normal problems. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't backing down. My mom spoke up for the first time, her voice trembling. "Emily, please. You don't understand. This is so hard for us. Olivia, she's been struggling, and we needed to help her. Can't you see? This is tearing us apart." I didn't even flinch. "No, what's tearing us apart is the fact that you violated my trust. You've spent my future on something that doesn't concern me," Uncle Jake added. "That's right. And it doesn't matter how much they try to guilt trip you, Emily. They have no leg to stand on legally. The money was never meant for anything but your education." I could tell that my parents were starting to panic. They had no response to that. Every excuse they tried was shot down by Uncle Jake or the mediator, and the more it dragged on, the more they looked desperate. It became clear that the only way they were going to get out of this was to pay me back what they owed. But as the session wrapped up, they tried one last trick. Olivia, who had been eerily quiet up until this point, sent me a message during a break. I saw her name pop up on my phone screen, and I hesitated for a moment before reading it. "Em, please. I know this is hard, but we're family. Don't make this worse. Just let mom and dad pay the money back. I'll do whatever I can to make it right. I read the message over and over, trying to process it. It felt like she was caught in the middle of something she didn't fully understand. And, in a way, I could feel for her. She wasn't the one who made the decision to take my money. My parents had used her as a pawn. But I couldn't let her make me feel guilty. She had a hand in this, even if it was unwitting. I put my phone down and turned back to the meditation. Uncle Jake had already picked up on the tension and addressed it directly. Don't let them play on your emotions, Emily. Olivia might be your sister, but this is about what's right. I nodded, the words sinking in. This wasn't about fixing things with my parents or sparing Olivia's feelings. This was about getting the money back that was mine, that had been stolen from me, and doing what was necessary to make sure I had a future. As the mediation ended, it became clear that my parents had no choice but to agree to pay back the money. Uncle Jake had held firm throughout the entire session, and the mediator had made it clear that the terms of the will had been violated. There was no escaping the fact that they had done something illegal. The agreement was finalized. My parents would return the money in installments starting the following week. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. The money would be returned, and I wouldn't have to spend years fighting for it. But the emotional toll was still heavy. I couldn't look at my parents the same way again. And while the financial piece was resolved, the damage to our family was already done. Later that night, as I sat alone in Lily's living room, I got another message from Olivia. I'm sorry, Em. I should have known something wasn't right. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was just scared. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. Maybe one day I would, but for now, I was done trying to make sense of all the lies, all the manipulation. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Weeks of legal back and forth, threats, and emotional exhaustion led to this moment. I'd been through the ringer, the guilt trips, the pressure to forgive, the manipulative phone calls. But now, sitting in that cold, sterile mediation room, I finally felt like I was on the verge of getting what I was owed, what my grandparents had promised me. Uncle Jake and I walked into the room together, both of us tired but determined. I could tell by his posture, the way his shoulders were squared, that he was ready for this fight. He'd become my rock through all of this, always reminding me that I wasn't in this alone. But today, it felt like the final battle. My parents were already there, sitting on the other side of the long conference table. They looked worn out. Mom's eyes were red and puffy like she'd been crying, and Dad kept fidgeting with his pen, clearly uncomfortable. I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for them anymore. They had made their bed, and now it was time for them to lie in it. The mediator, a middle-aged woman in a business suit, sat down between us, her clipboard ready. She tried to keep the mood calm, asking everyone to explain their side of the story, which felt like a waste of time to me. What was there to explain? They had stolen my scholarship money, and that was it. There was no excuse, no justification that could make it right. But of course my parents tried. Dad went first, his voice shaking with false sincerity. We've made mistakes, Emily, he started, looking at me with that pitiful expression that always made me want to roll my eyes. But we're willing to make things right. If you'll just come home, we can fix this. You don't have to keep fighting. Sarah, she's been struggling, and we did what we thought was best. I didn't let him finish. No, Dad, you didn't do what was best. You took what was mine, and now you expect me to just let it go? I could feel the anger bubbling up in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to. I couldn't lose control now, not when everything was so close. The mediator turned to Uncle Jake, and he took the floor without hesitation. Let's be clear here, he said, his voice firm and unwavering. My niece's college fund was set aside specifically for her education, not for your daughter's house. The will was explicit. The money belongs to Emily, and until that money is returned, there will be legal consequences. The mediator nodded, scribbling something down on her notepad. My parents looked at each other, their faces growing darker. I could tell they didn't like hearing this, but Uncle Jake wasn't backing down. He was the kind of person who wouldn't let things slide no matter how uncomfortable it got. I'm not here to ruin your lives, Uncle Jake continued, his voice calm but steely. But you've made a choice, and now you have to face the consequences. Emily has every right to this money. She's earned it. I could see my mom's lip trembling, and I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But I couldn't let myself feel sorry for them. Not after what they did to me. Not after everything they'd put me through. You have to understand, Emily, my mom spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Sarah was desperate. We were just trying to help her. It's been so hard, and we thought we could make it work without you knowing. That was the moment I'd been waiting for. It was the same old story, the same excuse they'd used to try to manipulate me my whole life. It's not your fault, Emily. It's Sarah's situation. We had to do it. But this time, I wasn't going to fall for it. I wasn't going to let them guilt trip me. No, I said, my voice steady. This is about my future. My grandparents wanted me to have that money for my education, not to make up for Sarah's problems. You don't get to take that from me and then act like you're doing me a favor. There was a long silence in the room. The air felt thick, heavy with tension. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not after everything I had been through. Finally, the mediator spoke again, breaking the silence. It's clear that there's been a serious misunderstanding here, but let's be realistic. Emily has every legal right to the money, and your actions have violated the terms of the will. I think we all agree that the best course of action is for the funds to be returned immediately. My parents looked at each other, and I could see the weight of the situation hitting them. They didn't want to lose everything, but they didn't have a choice. They knew they had crossed a line, and now they had to deal with the consequences. The mediator confirmed that they would wire the money back within the next week. It was a victory, but it didn't feel like the relief I thought it would. It felt like I'd just taken the first step toward rebuilding a future that had been taken from me. As we left the mediation room, Uncle Jake put a hand on my shoulder, his face softening for the first time in weeks. You did it, kid. You stuck to your guns. I'm proud of you. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was exhausted, still reeling from everything that had happened. But another part of me felt lighter, freer. I was going to get my money back. I was going to college. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first step in learning how to live my life without the weight of my parents' expectations dragging me down. That night, I got a message from Sarah. I'm sorry, she wrote. I should have questioned it. I should have known better. I didn't mean to make things worse. I hope you can forgive me. I didn't know how to respond at first. I wasn't sure I could forgive her, not yet, but at least she acknowledged her part in everything. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe over time we could rebuild a relationship, but that would take time. It wasn't something I could fix in one conversation. The next day, I got the email I'd been waiting for. An official letter confirming that I had been accepted into my top choice college with a full scholarship. My heart soared. For the first time in months, I could see a clear path ahead of me, and it wasn't clouded by guilt, anger, or betrayal. I was going to make it, no matter what. With Uncle Jake's help, I found a small apartment, and though it wasn't much, it was mine. It was my space, my future, and nobody could take that away from me. In the end, I didn't just get my money back. I got something more important, my independence, my voice, and the courage to face whatever came next. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly free,